Graduate School of Theology at Emory University, and research for her presentation, which has been going on for a long time in various ways. The life and legacy of Mary Davenport began as a student project at Kentler, and she also had to do with grant on funding.
Thank you. Thank you all very much, and I just want to thank Joan for just even the invitation, accepting this project and this paper. So I'm really happy to be able to share her work. And as Joan mentioned, I did receive a grant years ago as a travel award. It was the first Barbara Harris award, travel research award, and I was able to go meet with Mary's great-great-granddaughter and have some of the research and things that I will be able to share and pictures come from meeting with her and some of the things that she's shared. So thank you again for this really great opportunity. The meeting at Ascension Episcopal Church in Washington, D.C. had been planned for months. It opened with prayer and a devotional exercise. The sole agenda item was to give formal approval to the establishment of a benevolent home for children. The land had been granted, the people were in place to manage the home, and the bishop had already given his approval, even donating his own money to support the endeavor. But the motion to approve the home had no sooner been opened for discussion when it was immediately met with dissent. Clergy spoke in loud voices for and against the establishment of the home. Some questioned who should manage it, while some questioned how one home could possibly help all the destitute children it sought to aid. With tensions rising and clergy becoming increasingly divided, Mary, a lay woman, requested that everyone engage in a few moments of silent prayer. Well, Mary Davenport's call to prayer in a moment of crisis was the exact course of action you might expect from a woman with a deep faith in and love for Jesus Christ. Mary devoted her life to helping children who were suffering, were orphaned, or disabled, and she fought tirelessly for their physical and spiritual well-being. And she did not hesitate to fight against the institutional norms to do the work that she felt called to do. And such was her vocation. So this presentation, I will introduce you to Mary Davenport and her tireless effort in founding the Episcopal Center for Children. It was an institution that is still in existence today. I'll talk a little bit about her work with the Daughters of the King, and including one of the first Black Daughters of the King chapter, and then her work in establishing the Junior Daughters of the King, which is also still going on today. We'll look a little at the historical and ecclesial forces that shaped Mary's vocational identity, one that was deeply rooted in her love for Jesus Christ and her firm belief in the role of Episcopal Church and its ministries in transforming people's lives. And I think her legacy testifies to the power of prayer, to perseverance, and her willingness to stay, as we heard Becca Stevens talk to us about last night, the role of women in church, and her mission-driven approach to child welfare. So, Mary Hannah Converse Backus was born in a small Green Mountain town of Brandon, Vermont on July 8, 1849. She was the 10th of 11 children. Mary's father, Dr. Charles Backus, was the town doctor, according to records, an honored physician for many years. Consequently, though, with him in this small town, there were always people coming and going in their home. Mary and her family lived in Forestdale, which was just 3 miles east of Brandon. The Backus house was set up a slight hill on the edge of the forest and was situated across from Grace Episcopal Church, which was used during the summer months. And Dr. Backus and his family were instrumental in helping to found St. Thomas Episcopal Church in Brandon, which then became year-round. And I mention this only to situate Mary squarely in the Episcopal Church. Squarely. At 20 years old, Mary married Willard Davenport. And this picture I did get from Holly, her great-great-granddaughter. She married Willard Davenport at St. Thomas in September of 1869. Now, Willard was born May 9th, 1843. Also, he's from Brandon. Willard was a Civil War veteran. He fought for the 5th Infantry, Vermont, with the Army of the Potomac. And he was severely wounded in the Battle of the Wilderness in 1864. And Mary's father actually signed his discharge papers. He was actually shot through the left wrist, which is why his arm is behind his back like that. After the war, as you can see in this picture, Willard answered the call to become a priest and was ordained in 1873 at St. Thomas in Brandon. He served in several parishes, including Vermont, Maryland, and Tennessee, and then in 1887, he was called to serve as rector of Emmanuel Parish in Anacostia. I also want to note they have 6 children, and I'll talk just briefly a little bit about them later. George and Dana, their 2 sons, and then Francis, Mary, Hannah, and Irene, their 4 daughters. So Willard was called to Emmanuel Parish in Anacostia, and it was noted that the parish was starved for clerical leadership and for someone who would stick with them through the tribulations of a young parish. Willard and Mary moved their family into the rectory and helped stabilize the church and then anchor them squarely in the Anacostia community. So where is Anacostia? Has anybody heard of Anacostia? It's southeast DC. So up here you see in the upper left where DC is. Anybody heard of Washington, D.C.? Sorry. And then, so you can see Washington, D.C. here, and then I'll just go quickly here. So Anacostia up here, it's south of the district. It's across the Anacostia River, which is the eastern branch of the Potomac. And then this is historic Anacostia in the yellow. So number 4 here is Frederick Douglass's historic home. Their church was B on the intersection of B and 13th, and then the rectory was also here. So it kind of forms a triangle between Frederick Douglass's home, the rectory, and the church. But that's all historic Anacostia, and everything is still there today. After the Civil War, the population of Washington nearly doubled, and it included a significant number of African Americans, many of whom were freed slaves. Much of the city still had dirt roads left over from thousands of federal troops who were stationed there during and after the war. Further, the city lacked basic sanitation and public works. It just didn't have it at the time. Remember, this is 1880s. So even 20 years after the war, the city was still not great. Anacostia is the area of DC located just south, as I mentioned, across the Anacostia River. And for most of the pre-Civil War history, Anacostia was considered rural, very agricultural, due in large part to the restructured Navy Yard Bridge, which was the only bridge that crossed the Potomac at the time. And there was a newly established horse-drawn railway. Eventually, new residents started moving into the area. Many of these residents were veterans of the Civil War. Sorry, I missed a slide. So, and you can see looking north. So this picture here, you're looking north into the city. So now you can picture the Washington Monument. You picture the White House is what you would see before it was built. And then, of course, that's a picture of Pennsylvania Avenue in 1890. But it's during this time, in the latter half of the 19th century, that the United States was in the midst of the Second Industrial Age. There was rising poverty in many cities, especially Washington. And as elsewhere, child labor was prevalent in Washington, D.C. From 1890 to 1910, roughly 20% of the children between ages 10 and 15 were working. They were not going to school. Child labor was widespread. It was cheap labor, especially children living in poverty, who were paid even less. Many of these children worked in factories, mines, or mills, where the working condition was dangerous and the hours were long. A 1917 report by the Russell Sage Foundation described the child welfare problem as the most urgent problem the district had in the present time. And this nearly 14 years after Mary starts the Episcopal Center. So you can imagine in the mid-1890s, the problem was even worse for children back in that time. Well, as Mary traveled around the diocese, which was the Diocese of Maryland at the time, she saw the plight of the poor children all around her and was deeply troubled. There were many sick, crippled, malnourished, and homeless children living on the city streets. And it was quoted that Mary's motherly heart could not see homeless little ones without gathering them to her. And consequently, in a short time, the Davenport home, the rectory, was overflowing with children. She even adopted several. She brought them all into her home. And the daughters helped us as much as possible. It became clear to Mary that that the needs of all these desperate children were way more than she could possibly handle and personally handle. This was an era when government services were largely absent and private benevolent institutions were really just getting started. Mary saw that caring for these vulnerable children, though, was part and parcel of the church's mission and a direct expression of Christian discipleship. Her vision was that caring for these children could at least partially be accomplished by the work of the Daughters of the King, who lived by vows of prayer and service. And further, since the Daughters of the King was parochial by design, Mary saw this local context as a perfect means by which to carry out the mission of helping poor and suffering children. Now, who are the Daughters of the King, and how did Mary come to know about them? Well, just a few years after arriving at Emmanuel Parish and getting settled in, Mary had heard about the work being done at Calvary Parish in New York City by Reverend Henry Yates Satterley. And in 1890, Mary goes from Anacostia up to New York to see this work that he was doing. And while she's there at Calvary, she meets a group of women who are members of the recently organized Daughters of the King. And she was really and greatly impressed by their work. This is a time when, in addition to the deaconess movement, as we were hearing earlier, and women's auxiliaries, the Episcopal Church saw a number of sisterhoods develop, including the Daughters of the King. It was founded in 1885 by Margaret Franklin, who led a Bible class for her women in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in New York City, which is present-day Church of the Resurrection. They called their class the Daughters of the King and took vows of daily prayer and service. Mary Donovan, who wrote in her seminal book, A Different Call, said that daughters do not see their organization in any way as supplanting women's auxiliary or the existing church guilds, but rather as a means to deepen their own spiritual lives and provide sisterly support for Christ's mission. And this is exactly what resonated in Mary's spirit, and this is exactly how we as daughters live today. So when Mary returned home from New York, she shared what she learned about the Daughters of the King with her husband. After prayerful consideration, they started the chapter. They said, this is going to be a great idea for the church. We have to start this. So also, as a new ministry in the diocese, she consulted with with the Right Reverend William Perrett, who was the bishop at the time, and he heartily endorsed the Daughters of the King and concluded, quote, it would prove useful in his diocese. So thus, on April 14, 1891, Mary founds the Emmanuel chapter of the Daughters of the King with 7 charter members. And she then begins a series of systematic visits throughout the diocese to visit clergy in their parishes in Washington to ascertain their opinions and gain their cooperation to form new chapters. And almost all of them approved. Mary enlisted the help of women in other parishes to start their own chapter in order to extend the work that was already being done by daughters, or was being done by daughters. So just as an FYI, daughters pledged themselves to observe 2 rules, a rule of prayer and a rule of service. Prayer is critical and foundational part of the work we do. Service took the form of pastoral and charitable ministries, such as visiting shut-ins, hospital centers, caring for the poor, and extending hospitality to the stranger. And it is this very work of the daughters that spoke to Mary's heart and resonated with her spirit and gave her a great idea. Mary saw the work as a way to meet the needs of these suffering children that she saw all around her. And this is how she describes her inspiration. These are her words. In autumn of 1894, the Assembly of Daughters of the King was organized in the District of Columbia, and it seemed to many of us that one of the most effective ways of reaching mothers in an effort to spread Christ's kingdom among women would be through their little ones. Little children, without distinction of sex, naturally fall under the care of women. As the Brotherhood of St. Andrew cares for the small boys, Daughters of the King, as Daughters of the King, we should devote our attention not only to the welfare of girls, but to the welfare of both sexes. Having had some sad experiences myself in my efforts to provide suitable places for children who need to be taken out of the heat of the city in the summer, and being impressed with the great needs of homes for this purpose, I addressed a letter as the president of the Assembly to the chapters on Ash Wednesday in 1895, asking daughters to unite with me in offering a daily prayer that a way might be opened up for the establishment of such a home. Before Easter, an answer came in the form of an unexpected offer from Professor Melville Bell, upon whom I had called upon with another object in view. So Mary had asked the daughters, beginning on Ash Wednesday, please commit to praying every day so that something might happen so that we could take care of these children. So Mary had called on the home of a local churchman, Alexander Melville Bell, who was the father of Alexander Graham Bell. And she went there for another reason, but during the visit, she discussed the plight of the children and their need for a home. And apparently she made quite an impression on him, as his daughter describes their encounter this way. This is Alexander Melville Bell's daughter. One morning, Mr. Bell came down to breakfast and said to his wife, "I have not slept for 2 nights. That good woman made her children so appealing, I cannot get them out of my mind." The wise wife replied, "You must not lose your rest, Mr. Bell. You must not use your rest." Mr. Bell replied, "I do not propose to. For this very day I shall see Mrs. Davenport and tell her that she can count on me." So Professor Bell donates 14 plots of land in Colonial Beach, Virginia, and stated that Mrs. Davenport was free to do whatever she needed to with the land, so long as it would be used as a home for the children. He was prepared to deed the land directly to Mary, but she desired that it become a church institution, not an individual affair. So upon receiving the land and the blessing of Professor Bell for the work, Mary sought the advice and the approval of Bishop Perret. He was not only pleased with the gift from Mr. Bell, but requested that she prepare a circular that he would endorse and send to the rectors of the city. And in part, the circular reads, "The Daughters of the King of District of Columbia ask you to help them by your prayers and gifts in a work which they are undertaking, to provide a home for destitute and orphan little ones of Christ. The experience of many trying to provide shelter and church training for such children has shown them the urgent need of more institutions of this kind under the control of the church. Professor Bell of Georgetown has kindly given 14 lots of 50 by 150 feet at Colonial Beach as an adjustment to this future, as an adjustment to this future home, and as a resort for the sickly children during the heated term when the death rate is very great among them in the city." It's so sad. We desire to make use of this splendid gift this coming summer, which will let us essentially carry on this work. Thus, an excellent beginning will be made, and we trust the way open for the greater work in the future. So Bishop Perret invited everybody to this meeting of the Daughters of the King at Ascension Church to learn more about this ministry. So I did come across the minutes from this first meeting, because while it's a great idea to help these poor, destitute, and orphan children, not everybody wanted to go along. So these are the minutes from this meeting on Monday, April 22nd, 1895. At 7:30 p.m., in anticipation of the public meeting, an informal gathering of Daughters of the King was held at Ascension Church. Mary opened the gathering with devotional exercises. She then described how Professor Bell had generously donated the 14 lots at Colonial Beach, Virginia, for the establishment of a benevolent home for children. He also had donated $300 to further support the work. Mary stated that Bishop Perret had been advised and thoroughly approved of the new home. The only thing that remained, the bishop said, was for the daughters to accept the offer and to get to work with the least possible delay. However, before the public meeting began, Mrs. Williams from St. Agnes Chapter and wife of the rector of Christ Church suggested that this was not legitimate work for the daughters to undertake because it was not solely work among women. Her comment would set the stage for the critical controversy that followed. At 8:15, the public meeting was called to order. The Reverend Dr. John Elliott, rector of Ascension Church, opened with prayer. The Daughters of the King, Mrs. Edith Hart, was called upon as secretary to record the proceedings. Mrs. Mary Davenport restated the object of the meeting, given the particulars of Professor Bell's donations of land and money for the home. She then read the letter from Bishop Perret expressing his approval of the professor's gift, and the daughters worked with it. She further stated that the bishop suggested the circular be issued and made clear that the home would be under the auspices of the Daughters of the King, but that trustees would be appointed to hold the property until such time as the Diocese of Maryland was divided. And then it would be turned over to the Diocese of Washington. At the time, a Diocese of Washington was founded in 1895, so we already have a tension of church politics going on here.
What?
So the matter was now open for discussion, and immediately there was dissent. The Reverend Gilbert Williams of Christ Church Navy Yard spoke of the prevailing tendencies of parents to rid themselves of the care of their children, the impossibility of providing for all the destitute children, of the difficulty of determining which were the worthy cases, and of the difficulty of maintaining a charitable institution until it becomes fashionable. So he already lays out all the reasons why it's not going to work. He also read an article from the current Royal Cross, which is the daughter's publication, quoting an address from Bishop Potter of New York, which urged the daughters not to depart from the spiritual side of their work, that their mission was really not to engage in philanthropic measures, but to confine themselves to efforts for the spread of kingdom among women. The Reverend Buck of St. John's, Georgetown, who did not have a chapter of his own, believed that the daughter's constitution, being similar to the Brotherhood, would not meet with the bishop's approval. However, Dr. Elliott reminded him that the bishop had already said it was approved, and so that the work that the Reverend Davenport Willard already said that the work is absolutely needed for the strengthening of the parish life. And Willard continued by saying that I, for one, cannot afford to have a chapter in my parish if the members were obliged to confine themselves to the two rules. The establishment of the home for orphan and destitute work was necessary. Well, with the clergy becoming increasingly divided on what constitutes the work of the daughters, Mrs. Davenport requested that all engage in a few moments of silent prayer. Mrs. Williams moved that the lots from Professor Bell be accepted in the name of the church and not the daughters of the king. Well, that motion failed. It was then moved by Mrs. Rome that the gift be accepted in the name of the daughters, and that motion failed. Reverend Buck offered a substitute motion that the bishop appoint 3 trustees to receive the property and be turned over to the Convention of Washington. That motion passed. Further, members of 8 of the 9 daughters' chapters present offered their hearty cooperation with the help of the home. So the meeting, when the purpose was just stated by the bishop to accept the gift from Professor Bell and to get to work with the least possible delay, devolved over debate over the application of the daughters' constitution, but it also got deeply mired in church politics. At the time when women were beginning to exercise more leadership in the church and their service was increasing, some clergy sought ways to control their ministry. And this was especially true with the Church Congress of 1885, where the subject of sisterhoods and deaconesses was addressed. Thus, the question of what was and was not proper work of the daughters was not so much about their constitution, it was simply about controlling their ministry. So as a result of the meeting and further consideration, a week later, Bishop Perret rescinded his approval for the daughters of the king to undertake the work of the children's summer home. And his decision was based on his own interpretation of the daughters' constitution. But to get around the conflict, he and the daughters came up with a solution. While the bishop appointed 3 male trustees to hold the property, he also appointed a board of lady managers to run the home. And the board was comprised of daughters of the king from each of the chapters in the diocese, and he appointed Mary as the president.
Yeah, right.
So when Professor Bell donated the land to Mary and the daughters of the king, he did so with total confidence in them to establish and manage this home in order to take care of these sick and suffering children. The work had the official blessing of the bishop, and it had the energy and enthusiasm of Mary and the daughters across the diocese. It also had the financial and logistical support of the local people, as well as many people outside the city. And I have a report, Mary's first report of everybody who donated to this cause. And now that the enterprise was given the green light, the work began in earnest. Donations poured in from the city, clergy and daughters of the king from around the country. Lumber was purchased, carpenters hired, and in just 1 month, 10 children were received, 2 of whom were severely disabled. The children would stay for the summer, being cared for and fed, and Reverend Davenport would teach them how to pray. Many didn't have a Bible, so he would do Bible studies with them. Mary reflected that many and interesting were the sad cases and cared for. The improvement manifest in every case was a great source of joy for us. There are stories of girls coming in who were severely crippled. They'd take care of them over the summer. They'd get, as she said, plump and ruddy in their face, so I'm guessing and then would be able to go back home. But over the years, and over the next few years, they would take care of hundreds of children. But the needs of all these children far exceeded the summer home, the work that the summer home could provide. In fact, there was a terrible storm that damaged the home terribly, so they had to go back to the drawing board of even having that repaired and getting more money for it. So in 1907, it became, by 1907, they need to establish a winter home for children. And they do, it becomes known as, so they get land donated, and they build another home called the Bell Winter Home. So the children would go from Colonial Beach, Virginia, which it was originally called the Salt Air Home for Children, which is fun because Potomac is not salt water, but that's okay. It then goes to the Bell Winter Home, which is in Anacostia, okay? And in 1907, it becomes known as the Episcopal Home for Children. And there was a report by the Russell Sage Foundation. Still at this time, the home is still being overrun and overcrowded with children. There are so many children that need care for. And so a man from the Russell Sage Foundation comes in with Mary's request to do a report, to find out what is wrong, what do we need in the city. And he lists a lot of going on. We need people, we need more money, we need repairs, and still more resources. So keep that in mind, because it was cramped and inadequate. So a new site is then purchased in the northwest section of the city on Utah Street, where the Episcopal the Episcopal Center for Children, the Episcopal Center for Children was constructed. Now, for 15 years, it was managed by, this is much later, it wasn't founded in 2026, it was actually founded in 1930. So let me go to this slide.
Can we see that?
Oh, hold on. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I want to see that
Slides
timeline.
out of order.
Okay.
In 1894, the Bell Summer Home formed. It's also called the Salt Air Home for Children. And it's run by Mary and the Board of Lady Managers, which is the Daughters of the King. Then in 1901, the Bell Winter Home was established as an orphanage in Anacostia. And in 1907, it becomes known as the Episcopal Home for Children. And that's when the Russell Sage Foundation report comes out. And I'm going to follow up with all the findings. Then in 1914, 66 children were living at the home at that time. And then the Russell Sage report actually does a complete listing of all of the homes, all of the different institutes that were taking care of the children at the time. And it reports within 7 years, all of the issues that they found in 1907 were addressed. And it really highlights and talks about the work that was being done and the leadership that Mary had taken on to do this. And then in 1930, the home moves to Utah Street and is managed by the Diocese of Washington, where it's managed for at least another 20, 30 years by the diocese before it is sold, and then is run by a nonprofit. So that's the Episcopal Home for Children. I want to talk a little bit now about the founding of Emmanuel Mission, because the same year Willard begins his ministry at Emmanuel Parish, 1887, he's joined with a group of Black Episcopalians to form a small Christian community in Hillsdale. Now, while Anacostia is a mostly white area, Hillsdale, immediately adjacent to Anacostia, was a free Black community. And the group he meets in a private residence. They hold Sunday school in the morning for children, and at noon they have they have a service for the adults. And Reverend Davenport officiates at these services, doing baptisms, marriages, funerals, Bible studies. And as the membership grew, more and more space was needed. So they worshiped in a local hall, and in 1888 they established Emmanuel Mission, which is an Emmanuel Mission. Actually, Emmanuel Mission continues to grow, and they buy another structure in Anacostia, becomes the Chapel of St. Philip's. But as attendance at the services continues to improve, Reverend Davenport suggests that a Daughters of the King chapter be organized. The daughters at Emmanuel Parish were already engaged in relieving the suffering of the poor. They were deeply engaged in the work of the children's home. They also were donating food, clothing, fuel, and money to people in their community. They also taught the Sunday school classes at Emmanuel Mission. Mary, as president of the Emmanuel chapter and the Maryland Council, which was a diocese, the Maryland Diocese Council, actively helped Emmanuel Mission get started. And was officially organized in 1893 as one of the first black daughters of the chapter. And Eva Smith, who was the president at the time, writes that we found in the Royal Cross she writes this report to the National Council of the Daughters of the King in 1894. She says, "I cannot close without paying a high tribute to the president of the Anacostia chapter, now president of the council, Mrs. Davenport, for the assistance and advice given to us in our work. It is she who pointed out the way we should pursue and warned us of the errors into which we were likely to fall. Had we been left entirely to ourselves, groping as it were in the dark, little understanding the true aim and scope of this noble work, no doubt we should have made many mistakes, which it might have been impossible to rectify. Instead, I am glad to say that our chapter is in a prosperous condition, laboring earnestly and devoutly in the great field surrounding us for his sake." So Mary helps start their chapter as well. Mary also helped start the Junior Daughters of the King. It's another institutional headwind that she faces. Because while the fight to build the home for poor children was won, the Bell home was up and running, the Episcopal home was already up and running, she set her sights on helping the spiritual needs of the girls within her church. Willard was a member of the Brotherhood of St. Andrew, and they already had a junior Brotherhood of St. Andrew. So Mary was looking at how we can help the girls of a parish. She was already thinking of mentoring and the important role of Christian women in the lives of our girls and young women at this time. So the idea of the work of the daughters extending to girls and young women had started relatively early in the order's history. In 1893, the question of forming a junior branch of the order was referred to the Executive Council. And yet, 2 years later, the subject of organizing the chapter was still just under consideration. So at the third annual convention of the Daughters of the King in 1895, held in New York City, a resolution not to form the junior branch was passed by the delegates. And that was the same year, that was 1895, when she's still founding the home. She's now elected to the National Council of the Daughters of the King. In January 1896, Mary took a group of 12 girls from her church, the Children's Guild at Emmanuel, and forms a chapter along the lines of a daughters chapter and called them her Junior Daughters. To the girls, she was known as Mother Davenport, and she called these girls her 12 apostles. Mary's husband Willard designed the cross, the Junior Cross, which just has FHS across the horizontal bar, and this means for his sake. Word spread of the work of the Emmanuel chapter was undertaking, and other Daughters of the King chapters started forming their own junior chapters. The formation of the junior branch was revisited at the 7th Annual National Convention held in Atlanta in 1899. And by this time, the committee of the junior branch had formed, and a committee was forming just to, continue the work of considering the junior branch. Of course, Mary was a member of this committee. And at the convention, Mary read her seminal paper called Work Among Girls. In this paper, she really, with the skill of an attorney, eloquently lays out her case for the vital need of a girls' department. And she began the paper by stating that as Daughters of the King, we have a responsibility concerning the girls who come within the reach of our influence. Mary made a passionate plea for her sisters, stating that we must aim not to let their lamps go out for want of oil. She continues, is it a matter of no concern to us whether or not that child goes astray? Ought not we to see to it, if it lies within our power, that the little lamp of life that is placed by the Holy Ghost in that child's heart is kept alive and filled with oil, so that by and by it may burn brightly to the glory of God? Well, Mary's paper was well received, and on November 17th, nearly 4 years to the day after it was defeated, the Junior Daughters of the King was approved by the delegates at the convention. The Junior Daughters is still in existence today. Now, it wasn't just the juniors, it wasn't just the girls. It went on to college chapters too. It went on around the world. We have junior chapters all around the world. In the Philippines, for one, it was a very big, in Seattle and Philippines. Of course, now it's all over the world. We have so many. We have a lot of juniors in Honduras, Brazil. Anyway, there were hundreds of juniors of Junior Daughters of the King in the Diocese of Maryland and Washington. Anyway, Mary continues. Now, she remained, I tell you, we talk about multitasking now. Mary continues to manage both homes, the winter home, the summer home in Colonial Beach, until they form the Episcopal Home for Children. She continues her work with Daughters of the King at the national, at the chapter, diocesan, and national level. And she also serves as a chaplain for the Women's Relief Corps under the Grand Army of the Republic flag. Her 6 children. Mary's, the first son, George Davenport, is ordained to the priesthood in 1896, and he is consecrated as the 3rd bishop of the Diocese of Easton in 1920. Dana, her second son, studies for the priesthood, but he dies tragically in 1895.
Wow, another thing that happened in 1895. So her son dies the same year that she's doing all these political fights and all those. Wow.
Exactly. Francis helps run the Episcopal Home for Children. Also, Irene helps run the Episcopal Home for Children. Mary marries a man and becomes a missionary. They go to Utah to become a missionary. Mary passes away in her daughter's home in Washington on July 25th, 1931, at the age of 82. Helen Roberts, Washington Diocese president of the Daughters, wrote a beautiful tribute to her in the Royal Cross. She said, "It is with mingled joy and sorrow that we report the passing to the higher life of one of our best beloved daughters. Sorrow that her work on earth is ended, and she will no more move among us, but joy that she has entered the life triumphant, where all is peace, and she is safe in her Father's home. A devout Christian, a devoted wife and mother, a sincere and loving friend and neighbor, none knew her but to love her. Many men and women of this city owe their faith to her devout teachings. May her soul rest in peace, and may light perpetual shine upon it." Mary's funeral was held on July 27, 1931, at Emmanuel Church in Anacostia, and she was buried in her family's plot in Pine Hill Cemetery in Brandon, where she was reunited with her beloved husband. Reverend Charles Pardee, the secretary of the House of Bishops at the time, officiated at her funeral, with many friends and family attending. So thank you for pointing out her perseverance, because, as I said in the beginning, Mary, for me, is a testament to the power of prayer. Everything she did was based on prayer, collective prayer, and perseverance. That 1895 must have been an absolutely insane year for her. Dana actually goes missing. He must have suffered from a mental illness at the time, and he's missing for a long time. And they finally discovered that he was murdered in Scotland. They don't know, he was probably robbed and murdered in Scotland. The whole time she's going through founding and fighting the institutional headwinds and going through these church politics, she doesn't know where her son is. And then he turns up sad in that condition. But she's also, for me, a role model for the power of perseverance and the power of, the other thing is, she's sick. I have so many letters where she and Willard they're always tired. They take a month to go to a cabin up in Vermont just to get rest. She talks of perseverance. She is always undercut by insults. Nobody wanted the home in Anacostia. Nobody wanted an orphanage in their neighborhood at the time. And so she's fighting against that as well. She fights to even get this home started. She fights to get just a place to have the orphanage in Anacostia. And then I have a letter from her, I have a lot of letters between her and Bishop Perrette, and then her and Bishop Satterley, who becomes the first bishop of the Diocese of Washington, of insults. She's just subjected to some insults for the work that she's doing with these children. But she helps, I think for me too, it's not just simply the benevolence of trying to help these children. I think hers is really a theology of mission. Hers is it is mission driven. She is driven to help these children. She grows up in an era where her father's helping the children all the time. She herself has these children, and she just wants to care for the most vulnerable children at a time when people weren't helping the children. It was really just starting to get going. All the ministries to children to take care of them. So. And also to the power of the collective, the power of it wasn't just her, she really worked as a team. She worked with the daughters, she worked with the members of the Women's Relief Corps. I have also evidence that she was in the Eastern Star, I think, so I've got to follow that lead as well. But I just have found her to be just an incredible advocate for women in the church. Her husband was incredibly supportive of her.
Right.
Thanks be to God, he was incredibly supportive of the daughters. And just the power of what faith can do, what perseverance can do, and what prayer. So thank you.
Oh my gosh, that was great.